know.
How's it going? What's up, man? How you doing, man?
Good.
I haven't made one of these yet.
This is just the second one that exists so
right?
far. Yeah,
Okay.
Since the reboot.
Right.
since the reboot.
Since I realized I needed to care about Azure.
Did you get an AWS? You went to Invent?
Oh yeah.
I don't know
Reinvent?
what year this one was. It's not on here.
Yeah. They approved me to go to Build last year. I'd asked, and they're like, they were dragging their feet, and finally they're like, all right, you can go. And I'm like, okay, where do I start? Like, and they're like, well, you got to request the company credit card, and like, there wasn't time.
Have you done it since?
I did it, but I never got a company credit card. I filled out the stuff for it. Never heard anything back.
Is this your laptop?
It's actually my kid's
Is it?
laptop.
Gigabyte.
Oh, really?
No.
They make
Out of the game.
they make motherboards.
Do they?
That's what they're probably more known for than anything. But
So what happened to Tomash? Where's he going, man?
He won't tell me. I thought I had him this yesterday, but he wouldn't tell me. It's not Google. It's on the East Coast. That's all I got out of it.
But he's staying local, he said.
Found these two stragglers outside.
hey,
Hey,
How's it going?
good. How are
Been a
you?
while.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ashok.
Josh, nice
Just
to meet
nice
you.
meeting you. We'll be talking tomorrow, 3 p.m.
Oh, okay.
We'll be- Hi.
I have a shock. Daniel.
Daniel
Wardell,
Ashok.
yes.
Nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you as well.
I'm Matt Schumer. Matt Schumer.
Ashok.
Yeah.
Ashok.
Nice to meet you too.
What are we talking about tomorrow at 3 o'clock? I don't even know.
3 o'clock on Friday.
You will be
Yeah.
interviewing me.
Huh?
You will be interviewing me for one of the position.
Oh, okay. You're
Ah, okay.
interviewing. Gotcha.
So you work in this building or? you work
Yes, when I'm
in
in a building, I'm in this building.
Which floor?
It's going well, man.
So if you
Well,
work for the
let
man
me
on
see
the
if I can
Yeah.
Are you
get this
vetting
stuff
Yeah, but-
Oh, yeah.
that?
streaming here. Let's see.
So I belong to Wellness. Wellness team.
What team is that?
Go 365.
Oh, okay.
So we,
So what's happening with that team?
all budget cuts from our,
Well, isn't Go 365 going away or?
no, they are still keeping.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Modernization project.
Yes.
Really?
Blew me away.
Yeah.
So two things parallel going. One is the legacy to some newer Java tech stack. The other part is to prevent for Medicare population. So that is the area of the Cloud 3.0, all the good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, two things. It's staying there as of today,
Mm.
but if you ask January, I don't know. A lot of things going on.
What is the position that you're interviewing for? There's two different positions that are open.
It's for lead,
Oh,
lead developer.
it's lead. It's the Daniel interview.
Where are you at?
I had an interview the other day, and we were
That's where you
we were having the guys like really get into the Terraform skills, like,
Yes.
and Umar was having him do some
Yeah.
live coding and stuff.
Based
And,
on timelines.
and
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of was saying, like, well, I
don't.
I can't just code on the fly, you know, like, and
I happened to
and I
see
was
this on
like,
LinkedIn. I was
you
like,
know, this is a lead position,
that
and
sounds interesting.
you're going to
because,
be over a bunch
we
of
got a
people
guy
that are
who's
doing Terraform, so we expect you to know
flushing
know,
out all of our-
your way around Terraform. I wouldn't like date anybody for syntax errors.
I mean, we're already.
And I didn't realize until afterwards that John Jerem was messaging me on Teams going, this is not for the lead position. For an engineer position. But they never corrected me. In the-
Infrastructure as code within underneath it. I've moved on since then, but it's still there.
Yeah. Well, John apologized. He was like, "Yeah, I totally didn't tell you that this was not. We've been interviewing for the lead position.
Okay.
Yeah, he's
This one just wasn't that, and nobody told me."
Yeah, expectations, each different one of these, like what.
A check.
And Agile is current by Artex,
He was running it before COVID.
they are nowhere in the execution of this.
Yeah.
That's what I said. Yeah, some things are like that. That's what it is.
I like to be hands on the keyboard, so request to
Yeah,
pull me away from that.
the company I worked for before HMB is what I.
Okay, I get it. Chair.
Even though my title is architect, so.
Which is
So let's
the
go.
cheapest cloud, how are we gonna run it, how can we scale it and all that.
Yeah, it was like, you gotta go learning, it's a Percipio.
that's
and- Why is this not auto hiding?
Pretty good setup down here, but I wonder how much it's being used by actual people.
For
Yeah.
big meetings, but it is interesting because this camera will see that I'm talking and it will focus on me.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm the loudest person in the room usually, so it always. But these pillars are a little disconcerting.
There's not a lot of places to plug in, and the girls that set us up in here were like, "Oh, well, we'll bring in some of these power, what do they call them, kettleballs or kettlebells, and they're great if you can charge off of USB-C.
Yeah. But if you have a gaming laptop like us, it
I
doesn't
know.
work.
I had to borrow my kid's gaming laptop because I haven't needed a personal laptop in a long time. And I'm like, I'm not going to buy one at the last minute. So he is without Fortnite tonight.
How we doing?
Anyway.
Nice to meet you, Daniel. You think?
I guess.
I'll kick things off and I'll go stand at the door and text you if anything.
Yes, no problem.
All right. Well,
Hey, what's up, Camden?
Oh, man.
hey. Yeah, no, I'm out, guys. I'm leaving.
Well, I'm glad
What are you doing,
you're
man?
formally leaving.
Everybody's on one side here. All right, well, we're streaming this one, hopefully. I think it's working. I don't know if they have sound. I don't know really very much, but hopefully if people are joining, they can hear us.
What's the channel?
I've actually got it pulled up here, but I, of course, don't want to play the sound.
Right.
It is Tele-Learn Code, Tail Learn Code, T-A-L-E Learn Code on Twitch TV. If you go to the meetup link, it's on there. All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming. This is the second one of these. Hopefully, we'll have some more in the future. I think next month we're probably going to take off the holiday season. It's hard to find somebody who can jump in and do a talk. But we'll be back in January. We have a couple topics that we're picking from right now. Looking to do something on machine learning in January, hopefully, and then February we're going to have as well. But today we have a friend of mine and a good technologist here, Josh Franey, who's going to talk about using Terraform for infrastructure as code. for managing things in Azure at scale. Take it away, Josh.
All right. Yeah, again, my name is Josh Franey. I'm the cloud architect at Humana. I'm going to say Humana, right? I think so. Professional software developer since about 2004. And I say I'm a web developer since 1994. That's when I first opened Notepad and wrote some HTML. And I used Link's browser in Unix, not graphical at all. At that time, really didn't know that the World Wide Web was going to be the part of the internet that won. Since 1980, and more information than I ever needed. And I don't know why I share it with you, but apparently I became a concept Halloween 1979. So I thought that this made me 44. My kid told me the other day, "No, Dad, you're 43." So he gave me a whole year of my life back, and that I still have. So that makes me 43. I'm on all the sites, but I really don't use most of them anymore. But you can find me at Wholesale Brewing on Wednesday nights. That's the easiest way to find me. Walk in and yell Josh. I'm probably yelling Josh on a Wednesday. And for my hobbies, I play guitar and I ride a one wheel, and I like redesigning it all the time, rewrapping it. If you see somebody riding around a one wheel around town, it might be me, but if he's got a dog on his back, it's almost definitely me. What is infrastructure as code? How many people use Terraform? I mean, I think. I mean, infrastructure as code is just defining what infrastructure looks like in a way that you can store and source control. You can peer review it, and in the worst case scenario, you could stand it all up from nothing, or tear it all down, which is actually one of my favorite use cases of infrastructure. I love destroying things that we don't need anymore. Even my own code. I've always said my code is not my babies. If it's no longer useful, please get rid of it. Work locally, deploy remotely. Basically, just what I'm saying. It's like being a software developer, and you're writing the code on your machine with Terraform CLI. You're able to, format it. You're able to lint it. You're able to execute Terraform commands that tell you that the syntax is good and here's actually what it's going to do. And if you set things up right, the ideal situation is that you don't have write access to do anything anyway. But you can run a plan and you can read and you can see what's going to happen. But if you tried to execute it, it would fail because you don't have those permissions. Your pipeline does. And I think that's on the next slide. Use a DevOps pipeline to orchestrate deployments. Just like software, we shouldn't be deploying infrastructure directly from our machines. We shouldn't be clicking in Azure portals and setting up software. We should do our deployments the way the good Lord intended. Azure DevOps, GitHub Actions, whatever your tool of choice is. State management. Between real life, what's in Azure, this isn't Azure, I'll use Azure as my example. It could be AWS, whatever. Between real life and code on your machine, there exists a state file. And that's how Terraform knows what is managed by this Terraform configuration. So you could, in theory, get rid of the state file and just say, you own everything in this tenant, but that's not a good idea. In fact, I would argue that you really stop and think beforehand before you start writing Terraform about how to organize it in a way that, I'm part of the cloud platform team here at Humana. Cloud platform team manages virtual networks and subnets and MSGs and those sorts of things. And then app teams come and they build on top of that cloud platform. So as the cloud platform team, we manage that platform Terraform in a bunch of repositories, actually, not just one. And then the app teams manage their infrastructure, which would be like Azure App Services and things like that. So we've got ours, they've got theirs. Ours has to run first, and then theirs can build on top of ours. But it's something you have to think about ahead of time. Linters and security scanners. There are some tools out there like TF-Lint that can run in Visual Studio and tell you, your meeting, you can customize some things.
Are you allowed to ask questions?
Yes.
What's a linter?
Oh,
Like,
not a software-
this is the first word I was like,
not a
this is
software
the thing that
developer,
takes
right?
off your clothes. Not that.
Right. A linter is a tool that's able to look at your code and not so much syntax. Well, it is syntax, but it's not so much telling you what code is right or wrong, it's telling you whether it meets certain standards or it doesn't. There's JavaScript linters. C# doesn't have a linter per se because it's a language that is built.
Based on, like, is there multiple linters, like one person?
There's a limit for every language,
Yeah.
and then there's default standards for linters. But then you can figure out standards. You got a naming convention, you can put it.
Right.
And basically, it makes sure your code is clean to the standard.
Exactly. It's about code quality.
Yeah.
No, it's not necessarily about right.
Opinionated.
It's opinionated.
Okay. Does it like correct you for you, or like you have to pay to go in?
Depends on the linter and its integration with the tool that you're using, Visual Studio. Yes. Whatever it might be, or it might just be a standalone linter that you run an executable and say here's your code. But if it integrates well via this code, then you might just be able to click on it and say, okay, fix it. Some of them can do that. I haven't really used TF-Lint, so I can't speak a lot to that one. But yeah, I don't know.
He's opinionated enough.
I've custom modules and semantic version. Now, this was the first thing that popped in my head when Daniel said he was talking about enterprise Terraform. It is a big deal, but I feel like it warrants its own talk. Software developers have known for years that semantic versioning is an important thing. Terraform supports writing modules. Those modules, in some places, you may have a team that builds those modules. We do here at Humana from the resources that we have. And those modules then can, of course, a perfect example is there's a module for an Azure storage account. So they're able to enforce in there that TLS 1.2 is the only version of TLS that we support. And the app team that's writing their Terraform is just calling that module. So they have no option to choose an insecure version of TLS. But when you're maintaining a bunch of modules, you want to do that in a way that you can build on that module over time and not introduce breaking changes for the people that are using it, unless you need to. And there's a point where you're probably going to need to. That's where semantic versioning comes in. Major versions have breaking changes. Minor versions should not have breaking changes, but may introduce new functionality, but it doesn't in a backwards compatible way. So it's a contract between you, the consumer of the module, and the people that write that module. That you're not going to introduce breaking changes in the minor version. And then, of course, patch versions are for bug fixes, security updates, and things like that. So you pretty much always want to opt into those. Policies. Open Policy Agent is an open standard for writing policies that Terraform supports. And then there's a part of Terraform Cloud and Terraform Enterprise called Sentinel, where your organization is going to adopt Terraform Cloud, Terraform Enterprise, you can actually write policies that enforce things like what I just said, about TLS version. You can write a policy that says, if you're not using our module, this is not allowed. So you can enforce rules across your enterprise with Sentinel policies. Diversify your providers, and I've got a demo, and this is really what I'm going to focus on. The tendency, I think, when people first look at Terraform is, okay, I use AWS. I'm going to define my Azure infrastructure right here. So I pull in the Azure RM provider. Then later, maybe they're like, oh, I found out I can Terraform other things. I can Terraform GitHub. So I'm going to create another repository that defines my GitHub. I did the exact same thing with Azure DevOps a while back when I first started at Humana. You can Terraform your teams in Azure DevOps. You can Terraform your repositories, your build policies, you name it. You can Terraform it. But keeping that separate from your other Terraform, in hindsight, wasn't necessarily the best choice. Mixing all of these providers together is actually a really cool feature. That's what I'm going to demo today. Automate your documentation. There's a tool called Terraform Docs that can generate the same kind of documentation you would see if you were to go to Terraform's website. And the providers that are there, the modules that are in the module registry, there's a very uniform way that documentation is presented, and that tool can look at your Terraform and generate the exact same kind of document. Because who likes writing documentation? Nobody raised their hand. All right, let's go. So I've already done a couple of things here just to make this go a little bit faster. And I started, let's see, my code goes in my repos folder. I created a folder called Azure Meetup. And in here, I've got two repositories. They're not technically repositories yet. Hello Azure Meetup is going to be a web application. And Hello Azure Meetup Infra is going to be my Terraform. You could put those together in the same repo, but usually when you're deploying your application, you're not deploying your infrastructure for that application. So there are ways you could keep them in the same repo and have separate pipelines for both, but to me, it makes the most sense to keep them as separate repositories. That way I can deploy my infrastructure, then I can deploy my application, then I can deploy my application, and iterate over there. And if I really need to go back and say beef up my app service plan or something, then I've got a separate pipeline for that. There's no real benefit that I see in putting them together, but you could. In these, I've just dropped the git ignore for whatever language is going to go in there. In this case, this would be the Visual Studio git ignore. This is the Terraform git ignore. And if you go out to GitHub, it's GitHub/gitignore, github.com/github/gitignore. There are git ignore files for just about every language or environment where you're writing your code. You don't know what git ignores are? In a Git repository, there's typically a bunch of files that you don't actually want to store in source control, but they end up getting into the folder where your repository is on your machine anyway. So the best thing to do is before you even start creating a code repository is to drop that git ignore in there. So for Visual Studio, things like the .vs folder, for Terraform, the .terraform folder, where the providers get downloaded when you run Terraform commands. All of that stuff is already included in that git ignore that tells Git, don't check this into source control. Your bin folder, your obj folder, those are going to be in the Visual Studio one by default. So I've got my two repos here. Hello Azure Meetup, Hello Azure Meetup Info, but they're not technically repositories until I git init, and now there's a .git folder in each of those, and it is technically a Git repository. It's only on my machine. And over here, I see that I'm on branch main. Over here, I'm also on branch main, and there's some changes that aren't checked in yet. So on the, let's see, the infrastructure side, Azure Meetup, infra, there's that .git folder. That means this is now a repository. I'm just going to add a single file, main.tf. Yes, I want to change it. So main.tf is generally where you start when you start writing Terraform. You don't have to. A Terraform configuration is really just all the TF files that are in a folder. It technically supports JSON as well, but most people stick with the .tf, which is HashiCorp's language. And most repositories you see are going to have a main.tf. A lot of people have a providers.tf, and they just put their provider information in there. Variables.tf, it's where they define all their input variables. But all of that is really just subjective. There's no rules. All the TF files, whenever you run a Terraform command, all the TF files in that folder get concatenated, and Terraform doesn't care what's where. So it's up to you how you want to organize your Terraform. I'm going to do the worst way in this demo and put it all in main.tf. A good one. So now that's my Terraform repository, but my web application repository doesn't have anything in it either. So let's spin up a web application. Make sure I'm in the right place. .NET new web app. And now I've got some files. So I've got a whole running web application here just from the Microsoft templates. And let's open this in Visual Studio Code. My favorite way to do that is type code dot in the directory that I'm in. Yes, I trust the authors. Yeah. Should I? Good question. And instead of just welcome, I'm going to say, hello, Azure Meetup. Now, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain who is going to change this from .NET 7 to .NET 6 because I know the problem that is going to happen in this demo if I don't.
This isn't the dot, so it's okay.
Right. So it's going to be a .NET 6 app, and if I run this, never mind. Ah, you're right. Should be able to run this application on my machine, and we should see hello Azure Meetup. After it restores NuGet packages, runs a build. And it looks like it failed, but
On that C# dev kit, helping out in the bottom right.
not so much. That makes Visual Studio Code run more like Visual Studio, where it will add a solution file, which is nice, but I don't need it for this demo. My zoom bar is hiding the error from me on here. Target process, ensure that the target process is configured to use .NET Core. I did that. Well, it's actually not important that I run that on my machine for this demo anyway. Ultimately, we're going to push it up to admin right there. So let's see. I've got everything I need for this application. So let's run some git commands here. I see I need to add all the files, git add everything, git commit. Yep. The beginning, I can't see that because of my zoom bar, so I might have even misspelled it. And now main is up to date. Everything that I've done is committed locally. Now let's look at the Terraform. We're going to open this in VS Code. All I did was create a main.tf and it's empty. And I really was going to piece by piece add in Terraform as we went through this demo, but I realized that how long that was going to take. So there's the entirety of my file, and I've just commented out the things that I'm not ready for. So all we have right now is a Terraform block, which every Terraform is going to have one. Every Terraform configuration. A required providers section. Right now it just says we are going to use the GitHub provider. We talked about semantic versioning. Does anybody know what this syntax means when you're sourcing a module or a provider in your Terraform? Not quite. And you can do that. You can say greater than 5.0. You can say equals greater than 5.0. But the tilde has a special meaning that says that whatever the last number is of that version can auto increment. So this says, I'm okay with version 5.0. I'm okay with version 5.0.1. I'm okay with version 5.2, 5.25, but not 6. So this is
back with the module we were talking about earlier.
exactly
As long as you're cool with the mod major, you don't care.
right, because I know version 6 can have breaking changes, and if I trust the people that are writing the modules, wink, wink, you need to be able to trust the people that write the modules, then I trust that they know how semantic versioning works. They're not going to send me breaking changes in a minor version or a patch version. So this is the syntax I like to see. Like, we use tilde greater than 1.0 from the start when we're sourcing our own team's modules. We trust our own team.
I was going to ask if it's a straight line or a tilde.
It is a tilde.
Control
Control wheel is not working.
Control plus.
Control plus. There we
All right.
Thanks for that.
I'm like 20 feet closer and I'm struggling.
Yeah. And I can't even see the TV, so I don't know what you guys see. All right. So I've got this single required provider, GitHub. I've got the actual provider block, which later I'm going to provide a token in that provider block. But for now, it's just an empty GitHub provider. And I'm defining one resource, which is a GitHub repository. So I'm actually ready to go ahead and execute. Everything else is commented out. So let's go over here, and the first, there's 3 basic commands that you need to know with Terraform. There's a bunch of other ones, but the 3 main ones are init, plan, apply. And you could argue that I don't really need to know apply because I shouldn't be applying things, but I'm gonna. So Terraform init. Terraform has been successfully initialized. So let's go over to the code and see what happened. Am I in the wrong place?
You didn't save that file, so it still thinks the file.
It ran against an empty file, and it's like, it looks good to me.
I also wrote that document. It makes so many times.
And I should have been looking for this. So it says right now that it is installing the GitHub provider. All that really means is it's going out to a provider registry and pulling down an execute. Terraform CLI is really just a standalone executable, portable application. And the module, the providers that you use are also just standalone executables.
To the Terraform CLI installing your machine to use something like NVM.
No, I actually was going to demo that, and because you asked, I will go there. Releases.hashicorp.com/Terraform. You can go out to Terraform's site and you can download an MSI, and it will be in your program files, and it will update your computer's path variable, so that when you type Terraform, whatever the latest version was that you just installed, that's going to be in your path variable. When you work in an enterprise where there's a lot of Terraform repositories, almost inevitably you have different versions of the CLI around and different configurations built with these different CLIs. So it is helpful to be able to have more than one version of the CLI on. So what I do, and also at Humana, and I'm sure a lot of other places, I don't have admin rights on my own box, but I do have admin rights to my user folder. And there's nothing stopping me from downloading those executable files and just dropping them into my user folder. So that's what I do. I don't even bother with the MSI. I don't bother with going to our app shop to get Terraform. Instead, in my user folder, I created a folder called Terraform. I downloaded those zip files. I extracted them to folders with the version numbers here. And if I look in these, there's just a Terraform.exe in each one.
Some people actually package an exe inside of the Terraform project itself, just so everybody's using the same version of Terraform.
Oh, that's interesting.
Working on it.
So then the next thing I do is I go over to PowerShell and I do Notepad, or I could do code, $profile. And here's my PowerShell profile that runs every time PowerShell loads. I import PoshGit, which is that's the tool that at your command line shows you like what branch you're on. Which if you use Bash, you get that, you know that. But if you use PowerShell, that's a package that you can add on to do that. Then I do set alias and the word Terraform, and I map that to, in this case, 1.6.3, Terraform.exe. I also have a TF so that if I don't feel like typing the whole word, I also have an alias where I can just type TF. And when I first started, I would constantly misspell Terraform, and every time I did it, I would go add the misspelling in here in the hopes that one day I'd be doing a demo and I would misspell Terraform and it would work, and everybody would be like, what's going on here? But I also do some write output statements to remind myself when PowerShell loads what, the word Terraform is going to be mapped to this version. And TF157 is going to be Terraform 157. So let's see, where are we? All right, we ran a init, and I said I was going to show you, okay, so this .terraform folder is explicitly called out in that git ignore that I got from GitHub right here. Any folder called .terraform is not going to be in source control. And Visual Studio or VS Code is nice enough to show me with the color scheme that these files are ignored. And I see that there is a Terraform provider GitHub v5.42.0. Well, remember we said 5.0 and we got 5.42. That meant that constraint. So that's the version that we got. Presumably that's the latest version of v5. Now, ideally, I could be using 5.42, and Daniel could be working in the same project and be using 5.43, and we wouldn't have any problems. We all know that in the real world, that's not how things tend to work. People don't follow semantic versioning. They cause breaking changes. They don't realize that a behavior change is a breaking change. And Terraform at a certain point realized this is a problem. And they introduced this lock file. This lock file does get checked into source control. And it guarantees that when Daniel pulls this code down and tries to run it, he's going to get 5.42 as well. So now we have to make a conscious decision if we want to upgrade to 5.43.
More importantly, run it on non-production, and if you run the same code on production, production will be what non-production got. Because they could have done a release that morning at 5.43.
Yeah.
And then you try to push that into production, and everything breaks because they break that lock.
Yep.
Like associated with that deployment, and it just says, all right, when we ran this init, this is what we ran it with, and we're not going to change it until someone tells us to change it.
Yeah, the lock file gets checked into your source control, and because it's in this root folder here, Terraform is going to see it. It's going to say, well, even though there's a 5.43, you're locked into 5.42. Or you can just delete this file, or you can delete the GitHub provider section of this file, because ultimately there's going to be more providers defined in there. And then you can run Terraform init, and it's going to get 5.43. That's going to overwrite Daniel's version when he pulls from the repo to his machine, and now we're all on 5.43. Oh, okay. That's good to know. I would have edited the file. They probably don't want you editing that file because it is generated by the CLI. But all right, so let's go back here. Now I can tell you that if I run, well, I think I can run a plan. Let's do Terraform plan and spell it right. And I see that there's one resource to add, and it's a GitHub repository. And here's all of the attributes. Now, I didn't define all these attributes. Some of them are the default values of those attributes, if I didn't define them. Some of them are not definable. They're things that ultimately GitHub is going, well, once we apply these, it's going to be able to read those attributes back from a repository that gets generated. And it will store all of that in Terraform state. But it tells me that if you apply this, you're going to create a GitHub repository. If I go to apply it right now, I'm going to get an authorization error, but I installed the GitHub CLI before this talk. So I can do auth login. See, yes, I want to log into github.com. It says, oh, you already logged into github.com earlier. Do you want to re-authenticate? And I'm going to say no, but normally that would open your browser, right, to log into GitHub, ask you if you want to allow GitHub to talk to Terraform. You say yes, 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 and then you're signed in. Now, I can run Terraform apply. Again, bad practice. Shouldn't be applying things from my machine, but I'm not going to get as far as creating the CI/CD pipeline. And in this case, I need this repo for the code that I'm writing. So a little bit of a chicken or egg problem. Do you want to do this? Yes. So with this tiny bit of Terraform and the provider registry that we did above it, we've created a GitHub repository. And there it is. Hello, Azure Meetup Infra. Now it's empty. So I'm going to go out here and copy this Git code from GitHub. Probably best for me to go ahead and see the red next to my prompt. That's telling me that I have things that I haven't committed yet. So Git add dot, add everything. Now it's not red, but it still has a +3. That means there's still things you haven't committed. So Git commit -m, add the in repo. And now there's no weird things next to where it says main. So I'm good to go. And I'm going to paste that code borrowed from GitHub and say, yeah, go ahead and execute it. Now my local repo is tracking the GitHub repo. And this little symbol here is telling me that. So if I refresh GitHub, now I see my code. I've pushed it out there. And it's just those 3 files. And that's all we're going to have in this repository. So now I showed that I can technically deploy things directly from my machine. But that's not a good practice, right? So there's different ways that you can use ADO pipelines and execute Terraform CLI in your pipeline on your ADO agents. You could use GitHub Actions and do the same thing, execute the CLI. The good thing about that is it's open source and, it doesn't cost nothing. So that's the way a lot of places operate. And I really don't think that's a bad way to operate. I would not say that isn't enterprise. You can definitely use just the open source product with ADO pipelines or GitHub Actions and do enterprise scale stuff. In this demo, though, I'm going to use Terraform Cloud. Terraform Cloud is a SaaS product. I've got a free license here. I don't do anything but create an account. And the free account gets you up to 500 resources under Terraform management and only one agent at a time, but it's just me. So if I'm running 2 Terraform pipelines at once, I'm doing pretty good. But I have no workspaces. So one of the things that would have been cool if I had more time, Daniel's smiling because he knows what I'm about to say. There is a provider for Terraform Cloud and Terraform Enterprise, which is the on-prem version of Terraform Cloud. At Humana, we are creating Terraform workspaces in Terraform Cloud with Terraform. So we can do that. But then you really have a chicken and egg problem for this demo, right? Because this is where I said you need to structure your Terraform where you say, okay, first, yeah, this Terraform creates the workspaces. Then other Terraform creates the stuff that goes into those workspaces. That's a scenario where I can't come up with a good reason to put all of that in one Terraform configuration. So, but I'm going to do this through here anyway. New workspace. And the most popular option is a version control workflow. So it's basically like GitOps for your Terraform. And GitOps basically just means you are leveraging Git branching strategies to handle your deployments. If I update the dev branch, then it fires off a pipeline to start a dev deployment. The main branch is going to fire off a production deployment, whatever it might be. That's something you have to define within your organization. So I've already tied my GitHub and my Terraform Cloud together. That was a really easy, like 2-minute process. And it can see all of my repos. So hello, Azure Meetup Infra. That's the repo that we just create. Now it says there's no variables. We didn't define any variables in our Terraform, so that's right. Do a plan only run. This is called speculative plan. It just runs Terraform plan, and in the end, it doesn't give you an option to apply. So now I got an authentication error. Any ideas why I got an authentication? Running that same Terraform plan that we ran a few minutes ago. Yeah, it's not running on my machine. It's running on an agent in Terraform Cloud. And I use CLI to author. That's not running on the agent. I need a token. I've already got a token. I went out to GitHub, went to my user settings, went to the developer tools, generated a personal access token. So I've got that ready to go. Don't take a screenshot of this, but it expires right at the end of this meeting. Now, most of your providers. There's a few ways you can do this. Most of your providers support either directly assigning a value to a property in your block, and they'll usually support even secrets there. Not a good practice. Another way is environment variables. Almost all providers allow you to set all the provider properties just by setting environment variables. And those environment variables get evaluated before the other variables, before the Terraform variables. So I could go in here right now and just add an environment variable. I'll go ahead and do it actually. GitHub token, magic string. It has to be that. There's the value, and I can mark this sensitive, and I can add variable. And this gets stored in Terraform Cloud, and I cannot get it back out. It's not encrypted. It's not going to give it back. It's available to my pipelines.
If you're using this in a enterprise, you can manage those variables for the enterprise. So like certain things are set at a higher level, and there's only one of them for controlling like really sensitive things like all
Mm-hmm. And you can Terraform your variables. You can define Terraform variables in Terraform and push them from cloud. And it says there's one resource to create. And that resource is a GitHub repository. And I know we already created that resource. Well, when we ran Terraform init, what it did was it created a local state file. Right? And so Terraform running out on that agent doesn't know that we already deployed that because the state is already. So the next thing that I can do is comment out or uncomment this block. It tells my local Terraform about the remote workspace. So now the workspace knows about my code in GitHub. Also, my code that's in GitHub, if I add this block, knows about the workspace in Terraform Cloud. And now, if we locally, gosh, this keeps getting in my way. Terraform init, it says, as part of migrating to Terraform Cloud, Terraform can optionally copy your current workspace to Terraform Cloud. So yes, I'll do that. Yeah, it was that easy to go from working locally to working in Terraform Cloud.
And if you had Terraform generated that code in Terraform, applied it to Terraform, like, and then
There's no
uploaded it,
limit.
so he never would have had to apply from a single portal.
Now I'm running Terraform plan, and it looks exactly the same except for the yellow text here. It says running plan in Terraform Cloud. I've got my workspace set up to execute on an agent in Terraform Cloud. And even though I'm kicking it off with the CLI on my machine now, it's actually streaming the output from that cloud agent to my machine. And it says, yeah, there's no changes. And actually, if I go to Terraform Cloud and go to runs, I see a run that was triggered via CLI. So I can now have new runs that I kick off from Terraform Cloud from the UI. I can kick them off from the CLI, and it's all running on the agents in the cloud. So let's go back to our Terraform and let's make a change here where we're gonna add a repository for our web app that we created, right? Just uncomment this repository, but instead of running it from my machine, add repo for web app. I'm just going to push it straight up to GitHub into the main branch. Not something you do in real life. You're going to have gates on your main branch that require a pull request. And so ultimately, updating that main branch is always going to be the result of merging a pull request. But for and here I see in Terraform Cloud, add repo for web app. So it went to GitHub. GitHub notified Terraform Cloud, and it went ahead and kicked off a plan for me. And I see that there's one resource to create, and it's that other GitHub repository. So I go down here. I see, yeah, it looks good to me. And we're going to apply it. The agent picked it up. And one created. And if we go back to my repositories, I now have two repositories, just like I had on my local machine. I'm going to the Azure Meetup one for the web app. There's no code there. Copy this. Go over here. I just see main there, so I know I'm up to date. I've committed everything. Paste. And now I have a local repository with that other GitHub repository. Go out to GitHub, refresh. There's my web app. All right. Well, what can I do next? Ultimately, we want to run this web app in Azure, right? So we're back to our Terraform. And we're going to add the Azure provider. So we start by adding Azure RM provider, which is coming from the HashiCorp registry. The GitHub one is the integrations registry that is hosted by HashiCorp, but that means that Terraform HashiCorp is actually the ones writing the Azure RM provider, or at least working directly with Microsoft to make sure that it's kept up to date. Whereas the GitHub one, GitHub's maintaining it, probably with less help from. They have a vested interest in keeping the Azure RM provider up to date, though. Yeah, that's another topic. Here's my Azure RM provider block, and I have gone out to Azure, personal Azure, onto the tenant properties, onto my tenant GUID. I only have one subscription. It's the pay-as-you-go subscription. Since I got rid of our MSDN subscriptions. I also created an app registration in Azure AD, and I generated a client ID and client secret. And then I gave that app registration, which is a service principal, the keys to the kingdom for that subscription. I probably could have given it a little less permission than I did, but least privilege. Probably not.
You could also use an easy CLI, authenticate here to do that, and then use an environment for client.
Right.
So when you're running locally, it's you, but on the server, it's.
Yes. And I don't know why I didn't do that. So what he's saying is I could have just omitted the client ID completely and then set that via an environment, just like I'm going to do with the client secret. And then when I'm running this code locally, it doesn't know anything about a client ID or client secret. So it's going to default to AZ CLI. So just like I did with the GitHub CLI, I can run AZ login, authenticate, and then Terraform on my machine is going to use that AZ CLI to authenticate to Azure.
Well, what's cool about that, if you have the ability to create app registrations, you could put the app registration in the code.
Yes, I thought about that, but I was like, there's definitely not time for that. But I could. Azure AD is a separate from Azure RM, and Azure AD provider, I could have used provision, the service principal, and the secret, and then use the output of that as the input of a provider. I don't think you can.
No, you have to take it and then put it into Terraform variables.
Right.
But the only thing you can't create with this method is the subscription.
Right.
You can't, or especially the tenant.
Can you manage subscriptions with Terraform at all?
They have an API, but I don't think you can.
Just edit them or read. Yeah, there's definitely a data source.
Changed by now, 'cause I know you could report on that.
Added it into Azure RM.
Mm.
That was
Yeah,
all.
I don't know you do it through Azure,
Mm-hmm.
because it's always tied to billing.
Well,
It's tied to billing scope. There's so much complexity there.
Well, and it
Yeah.
also has, like, subscription ID is a required parameter of the provider. So, like,
Yeah.
it's required.
Yeah.
Works that they subscription down.
Just like AZCLI, you always have a context
Yeah.
that includes a subscription.
For subscription.
Yeah.
You know, you can do it like AZ login -- no - subscription.
Oh, I didn't know you could do that.
From
Cool. Okay, so we know we're going to need a resource group. Everything needs a resource group. I'm going to call it Hello Azure Meetup-RG. The location East US 2. And I'm giving it some tags here, and notice that the tags I'm giving it, I named them code and infrastructure. They are referencing the output of my GitHub repository resources. So that's two separate providers, and the output of one is the input to the other. Now that does a couple of things for you. For one, it keeps things very consistent. It can't be wrong if it came from the output of that other provider. And two, it creates a dependency that becomes part of the dependency graph that Terraform is creating behind the scenes. Terraform knows now that it must create those repos. If we were to blow everything away and start from nothing, it must create those repos before it tries to create this resource. There is a way to force a dependency. You can add a depends on and specifically point at another address of a resource in your configuration. Every time I've ever seen anybody do that, it was wrong.
Yeah, and it can break things, because if you ever add one of those, make sure you're depending on a variable.
Mhm.
Because otherwise, if the other thing changes, it will destroy whatever it is. Like, even if you just change the name of something, you're like, I'm going to change a tag, then it will say, well, I need to destroy this other resource because that tag changed.
Oh yeah.
And it will mess up your stuff.
Yeah.
So it depends on you'll see them a lot though. I think they're solving the problem.
Not usually. There's one exception that I've seen, and I still didn't think it was a good solution. But the Azure RM provider, we learned that if you try to create, so Terraform will try to parallelize creation of resources to increase the speed at which your apply runs. And we would occasionally be defining like 20 NSGs in Azure and trying to deploy those all at once. And Terraform's like, all right, deploy 20 NSGs, and Azure would fail. But we needed those 20 NSGs. So the solution that team came up with was make every NSG depend on the NSG that was defined right before it. And they then basically serialized all of the NSG creation. We could do like 3 or 4 at a time, but now we couldn't. We could only do 1 at a time because of the way that code was introduced. So we're going to add a resource group. We're going to add an Azure RM service plan. I've ever used Terraform to make an app service plan. It was Azure RM app service plan. And then they deprecated that resource in favor of this one, but they'd already used up the name. So they're like, what do we do? Let's drop app from the name. Now it's Azure RM service plan. Likewise, they deprecated the Azure RM app service that goes into that app service plan in favor of Azure RM Linux web app or Azure RM Windows web app.
Is one of the few that I've seen that do breaking changes.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm creating an app service plan. I'm using the output of the resource group as the input for resource group name and location. So that creates a dependency now. Now it knows I must create this resource group before I can create this app service plan that goes into it. I'm saying it's going to be Linux and it's going to be Premium 1 V2 SKU. And I tried to do the free one and it kept failing. And I'm like, all right, I'll just do Premium, but I'll blow it away as soon as I'm done anyway. So unless I forget. If there's time, I was going to show how to tear it all down at the end. We'll see if we get there. It's 7. It's supposed to go to 7:30.
Okay, good.
So defining my web app, of course, I'm using the output of the app service plan. I'm specifying .NET 6. That's part of why I had to actually make it a .NET 6 app, because the provider balked when I put 7 in there, even though the documentation specifically says 7.0 is a valid option. No worky, as Daniel likes to say. And I'm going to skip on this part for the time being. So let's save that. Let's push it. Add Azure stuff, commit, sync. We're pushing it to GitHub. GitHub's going to tell Terraform Cloud. If I go over to runs, current run is it's currently running a plan. And it failed. And it failed for authentication reasons again. So I need to go into my variables. And I need to add a variable, environment variable. This one's going to be the magic string ARM client secret. And go to my notes. Client secret. Don't get that trailing space. It is sensitive. Save. New run. Start. Yes, no, it is.
Is that right?
Yep.
Oh,
Azure Resource Manager became ARM, and their competitor to became Bicep.
I never even thought about it. Never even cared.
I didn't even care. That's just the name.
It just clicked
Tell
in
you
me.
what it is.
I'm like, okay, that makes sense. How might I click before?
I already got that really neat. I just, someone told me.
Someone told me. Yeah, someone told
I
me.
just,
I think the problem is Josh.
thought there new schemes they wanted to put into Azure would be, if they started with Bastion, and then Bicep, and
Yeah.
management.
So I can see here in my output that it's done creating the resource group, and it's done creating the app service plan, and it's working on creating the app service. While it's thinking, I'll go over here to Azure on my resource groups. There it is. Hello, Azure Meetup. And there's the app service plan. And there's the app service. Now, if I ran it, I would get an app, but it wouldn't be my app. It's just what you get by default when you create an app service. By run it, I just mean open the website. Your web app is running and waiting for your content. So just for sake of completion, now this is stuff I can define in Terraform as well. But I didn't have a chance to do it before the meeting. So I'm going to say, get my code from GitHub, from the LJ Franey organization. The repository is Hello Azure Meetup. The branch is main. I've already given Azure rights to my own GitHub to be able to do this. Save.
You can control that through Terraform as well.
Exactly.
Create rights to access your Azure.
And it says no deployments found. If you've just configured this, refresh to get the latest. But let's go over to my repo and refresh here. It actually did a commit on main branch because I gave it access to main. I wouldn't normally. And it added a .github folder with /workflows where it put a YAML file in there. So Azure created a GitHub action and put the YAML that defines that GitHub action in my code repo, which automatically tells GitHub there's an action there that you can execute to deploy this code. And if I go to actions, just because that YAML file is there, I see that it's actually running. And it just deployed my code to my app service. And let's see. Here's my web app. Oh. Control refresh maybe. Hello, Azure Meetup. So now we have our app running in Azure. I didn't create any repositories manually. I didn't create any Azure resources manually. I have an app that's running in Azure. And I won't go through this, but these other resources here that are commented out are the resources that I would need to create that link between the Azure App Service and GitHub. It's an Azure RM App Service source control resource. It is, but it was really nice that the portal did a bunch of things for me that this wouldn't have done, like create the YAML file and check it in my repo. But that doesn't mean you can't do it. Let's add this resource here. And notice it's using the output of my GitHub repo. So there's no way I can type this wrong because the URL for my GitHub repo is the output of the other resource. And then the ID of the Linux web app is coming from the Linux web app resource. So if I save this, add source control, commit, push. The problem now is that this stuff already exists. And because I've defined this as an individual resource, it's not a property of the web app. So it's not defined within this resource. They've chosen to make that link its own resource. And so Terraform tracks that as its own entity with its own address in your Terraform configuration. So the fact that it's already out there and now I've just added it in means I need to import it into my state. And let's see what this did out here. Runs, add source control. It says, oh, there's one to create, but I know I already created it. So what you have to do then, and I bet I've got it in my history. Move this. There's a Terraform import statement. Now you can also define imports in Terraform now. You didn't used to be able to, but I could have included in my Terraform the import statement. And it's only valuable one time and it stays there forever in your code unless you delete it. But there is a way now. The problem was that once they introduced Terraform Cloud and Terraform Enterprise, you didn't have the CLI. Most developers don't have the CLI at all on their machine. And there really was no good way to do imports except to run from a developer's machine. So now there is a way, but you can still do this.
But you do have to have access to Azure to do that. Work.
It's telling me that my state file is locked. So I need to go out here and discard this run. It has the state file locked.
Yes, read access to Azure, write access to the state, which that was a big problem because that now means you either have to have AZ CLI access or you need secrets. And those secrets you're trying to protect. So that they did fix it. You can do it in code, although it is using a declarative language because it just creates until you delete it, and if you delete it, it doesn't change anything.
Does it evaluate every time? But like, if you were to delete that element from the state, would it see that again and try to do?
Well, no, it doesn't, because I've tried that. But what I don't know is what happens if you do it, change your mind later, but you change your mind again.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, if somebody says, hey, kill that, so you kill it. But that's after you imported it. And you're like, oh, can you recreate that for me? And does it,
So you probably have to go into probably a state element, or you have to remove that too, so it knows that or so it doesn't think it's.
oh, no, because it's insane. So you can destroy it using Terraform, but that code still stays. The one that's the import command, it stays. It's just free.
I'm about to log in that with my Humana account. Yeah. Don't worry about it.
Well, it's because that client ID, because that's in your provider block.
But I added an environment variable on my local machine for the client secret.
Oh, you did? No.
I just did. So I'm not sure why it's not. But I will tell you that there are differences between the resource that I defined here
And what it did.
and what it actually did out there. And the plan that it would have generated would have said, I need to destroy this and recreate it. And that's where I gave up and said, I think I got enough. I think I got enough for the demo, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like it's just like a keyboard demo. Running in state file errors in Terraform.
Right.
Yeah,
Did you really do Terraform?
That's a good point.
exactly.
Is there a good way to view state in TFD? I'm really nice to pull that single file called state, but
Yeah, I know, right?
to even look at what you're.
You can do a Terraform state pool.
Right, but is there any
Yeah, you not a good way though.
file?
There's even a search capability of it, but I do not know how that search works. I've tried using it. It's like a custom syntax. And I go in there and I'm like, I'll search for this. And it's like, I have no idea what you mean. So I have to download the state file. And of course you shouldn't be doing that because now there's a copy on your local machine of potentially sensitive data.
But also now there is a Terraform state provider that allows you to bring in another Terraform state as a data source in your Terraform. So when that state changes, your that data source is going to pull in that latest information, and then that can propagate through the other resources that you can.
That's hard code. Terraform data element.
Yeah.
Data element.
Yeah.
Instead of doing that, you could say, well, just always pull from the state that definitely knows about that thing, rather than me arguing.
Right, because ultimately your Terraform becomes like a database of the state of your cloud. You know, you're hard coding your state, your cloud state into that Terraform. So yeah, it kind of makes sense when I talk about how there are sort of building blocks of Terraform. You need to build your VNets and your subnets, and then, you know, technically those other downstream Terraform configurations could reference the state of the upstream ones.
So what you talk about is that you could tell Terraform about resources that you want to leverage without it tracking state. So you'd say, oh, here's a resource that here's a storage account. You're going to get something from that storage account. But this Terraform doesn't know about that from the state perspective. It only knows about it from an interpretation or a planning perspective. He's saying instead of just hard coding about that storage account, you could pull in another state file from the browser that does use that storage account and always get the information out rather than hard coding.
Yeah, used to you would use data sources. Like you'd put it like in your code, you'd put a data source, but that became a little problematic because now you have to have access to that resource in order to read it.
Oh yeah,
But instead, you can just use state. You can have a remote state.
I did
So
not
you're-
think about that. That makes total
And-
sense.
and
'Cause
what
you don't want them to be able to read that storage account from Azure necessarily, but
Yeah.
they can read the Terraform state file that defines that.
And you can in Terraform Cloud and Terraform Enterprise, you can define hierarchies, and you can say, you know, this level can read state from this level. So like your VNets, for instance. And then those service principals don't necessarily have to have direct access to the portal. You just have access to, and you really don't want to be using remote state though, because remote state gives you access to all of the state. What you want to use is output variables. So you say this workspace outputs the VNet name or ID, and that's it. So they can't go in and interrogate all the other stuff. They can only get that ID. So it's that's a newer feature. They've been adding and adding things.
So are you done?
So that's pretty much it. Yeah. I mean, we did a lot. We got an application running in Azure.
Way better than last one.
Yeah, who's that guy?
So
Just
we wrote some
talk for
code
an
and
hour?
pushed it to GitHub. We pushed that to Terraform Cloud. From Terraform Cloud, we pushed it back down. I don't know why that's going automatically, but in the end, we can terraform the world, which is the one thing that doesn't need terraforming.
Where is Terraform in as you get deeper and deeper and deeper into infrastructure? Where's Terraform
So-
come prohibitively problematic in infrastructure? We're talking DNS, we're talking about Azure AD.
We use it for DNS.
So where it becomes problematic, from my experience, is when the owners of a infrastructure product don't allow scoped RBAC access. Like a Palo Alto is a perfect example for firewall rules. You can either create firewall rules or you can't. There's not a like, hey, I'm limiting you to your little box over here in creating firewall rules. So if you were to be like, hey, app teams, create your own firewall rules, they could just go in and just like destroy everything.
And I think about this doesn't even have a couple of different verses, right?
Right. So, but you can solve for that as a group by creating your own provider and create APIs that scope access, because you know exactly what your dev teams are supposed to be doing. So you could create your own API to your own provider, and then you could give that to a dev team and say, create firewall rules all you want. And you could even, in your API, just have a ticketed process behind the API, like that just submits standard enterprise tickets to get things created. And it's a good compromise to have infrastructure as code.
Well, I even think of Humana, for example, like the process of creating the firewall is pretty complex and probably gets done wrong more often than
And
not.
the same ticket twice can one time get rejected and one time get approved, and one time work and one time not.
The provider does it the same way every time. Well, the process is terribly complex. You can solve it with a provider that does it the same way every time. And if it's the only way to submit one, then your people who are consuming those tickets know to always trust that they came to the right.
Well, and you can find process problems. Like that ticket didn't get worked, but it was submitted by automation. Let's track down why it didn't get worked and fix the problem at the cause. And what I really like is the ability to, in these APIs, go ahead and create things that aren't problematic. Like go ahead and create firewall rules, because that just makes things more permissive, right? But then the destroy, that's where it's like, oh, let's not really destroy. Let's submit a ticket for destroy so people can approve it. And,
Don't want to allow them to take his own file down.
exactly.
Take his own file down, all kinds of stuff goes problematic.
Yeah. Which Infoblox has a nice provider that has scoped access that you can do.
Or you allow them, DNS,
Right. Exactly. Let them create them, but not change them, or let them give them some access, but not all. Yeah.
Touch the end.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But
Or the MX records for that matter, and just stop everybody from getting
But I went through the exercise of creating a business, right? And I started only from Terraform and never touched any. So I created a GitHub org, and then I created an org secret, and then I created repositories, and I didn't use Terraform workspaces. I just used the CLI, the open source, and created. So there was never a point that I pushed a button in anything, and that had web applications running, had Let's Encrypt certificates. It had GoDaddy DNS managed. It had, so it was just a complete business infrastructure without pushing a button. Was the subscription. Yeah, I had to go in and create a subscription, and then I had to go in and sign up for personal accounts, in which the act of signing up for a personal account in Azure creates a subscription. So that was done for me, and the GitHub account. So those were the only, I just logged into 2 systems. That was the only buttons I clicked anywhere.
Did y'all see what I just did while we were talking?
No?
Just
Tore it all down. I destroyed the world. I went into here. I commented out every resource. I left my providers in there, but no resources anymore. I pushed that to my repo. It ran a plan that said I'm going to destroy everything, and I applied it.
So that's
all gone.
Costing $0, and he could just uncomment it and run it again, and it comes back.
All the coins are gone from my GitHub. My Azure resource group doesn't exist anymore, and everything in it. And it worked. It walks the graph backwards. I watched it. It's like, okay, well, first I got to delete the web app. Now I got to delete the app service plan. Now I got to delete the resource group, and now I can delete the repositories. So.
Well, I know what you can't do. My desire to
Yes.
Can't argue with that.
So we going to go over, are you thinking Troll Pub or what? Yeah. Josh. Thanks, Josh.